Who exactly falls for the trauma bond? Is there a demographic? What exactly is it? Pause for a second and ask yourself if you can define what the trauma bond is in one clear, cohesive sentence. In fact, I'd love to hear what came up into your mind in the comment section below. What does it do to you while you're in the trauma bond? And more importantly, how do you break out of it once you realize how damaging it is? Those are 4 important points that we're going to talk about today, okay? So we're going to dive in and start with who falls for it. And I want to talk about a myth that's out there. And the myth is that the only people that fall for it are people that are broken or damaged. And this thought, this myth that I want to clarify actually came up because I read a comment on one of my old videos and I want to share it with you. It says, the first part of the video put me off immediately. Most people who enter into a trauma bond aren't whole, happy, and healthy, hence why they were susceptible in the first place. So this is kind of challenging to understand and explain because it can almost sound like a contradiction and yet it's not. So bear with me for a second. Okay, so a person can be happy, healthy, and whole now in the present. They can be completely happy with who they are. They can have a high self-esteem. They can be confident. They can be successful. They can have all these amazing things in their life going for them, and they can feel complete as they are and still fall for a trauma bond. And this is where it kind of sounds a little bit like a contradiction. So the reason that can happen is because, let's say somebody in childhood had a parent that maybe they had to chase for approval. Maybe that parent taught with conditional love. Maybe there was neglect. There was some kind of childhood trauma. And again, that's on a spectrum. It doesn't have to be severe. It could be very mild, maybe mild to moderate. But they've healed, right? They are healthy in who they are in the present. They can feel completely healthy. And yet, if they haven't been able to release the trauma, which by the way is something that is very hard to do when you're happy, because when you're happy, healthy, and whole, the trauma is dormant and it's in an area of your brain that it's just not even there. You don't see it. It's compartmentalized. You don't notice it. It is completely 100% not affecting your life. That person is happy and healthy. Their trauma is dormant. Very much like somebody that has cancer cells. Maybe they have cancer cells, but the cancer is benign. Or the cancer cells, they're not turned on, right? They're just there. Just because they have cancer cells doesn't mean they have cancer. Doesn't mean that they're not healthy, right? While those cancer cells are not activated, they are 100% healthy. However, something external can activate them. Once those cells get activated, then things can change. So it's the same thing with somebody that's healthy in the present. Something externally can activate the dormant trauma, and that's when you go from happy, healthy, and whole to, wait a second, this trauma has just come up, what's going on? So first of all, I just want to talk about what activates or what turns on that trauma. Sometimes you might meet somebody that on a conscious level, you're not even thinking of your past, you're not thinking of your childhood trauma, you're not thinking about anything that happened in childhood, but your subconscious remembers everything. And for some reason, your subconscious makes a connection to this person in your life and the past. That connection will wake up the trauma. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Basically, what your brain is doing is it's noticing that there's an opportunity, or it's thought pattern, okay? This is an opportunity to resolve what is still not resolved in the brain. So it thinks, okay, this is a similar circumstance, this is a similar relationship, maybe this time we can get it resolved, we can figure out what we couldn't figure out in childhood. So that trauma gets activated with that purpose. Okay, your inner self really just wants to be healed. So one of two things will happen at this point. Either one, you'll be in the relationship. You'll start a relationship where it's very subtle in the beginning, the similarities between what happened in childhood and what's happening now. But what happens is, in scenario one, the person starts noticing, wow, this person is really abusive. They may get sucked in for a time period, but sooner or later they're very aware that this person that is pushing and pulling, love bombing and devaluing is not healthy. And they begin to see the relationship through the eyes of the adult that they've become, which means, I don't deserve this. This is wrong. No one should treat anybody like this. I deserve better. And that adult person that reaches that conclusion puts down boundaries, which causes that person to either discard, or the individual themselves discards the relationship. Now, that does happen. I've worked with people in my coaching practice that are in that scenario, and there are people that usually noticed that the relationship was toxic within a year or two, okay? And they don't stay longer. They wind up leaving, but there's still some damage there. And they work through that, and once they do that, they have actually dealt with the present problem with that abusive relationship and healed that trauma, because that relationship was actually an opportunity for that trauma to be activated. They work it through, they resolve it, and they never wind up having a relationship with somebody like that again, because they have changed their beliefs. In childhood, the belief was, I have to please, this person's mad at me, that means I'm bad. And those old beliefs got woken up in the relationship, but this time they see it with adult eyes. And they're like, wait a second, just because that person's mad at something that doesn't make sense, that really is no reflection on me. I know who I am. So they actually get to heal those beliefs. Okay, so that's one scenario. The second scenario is that when that trauma gets woken up, if you're not careful, if you're not able to hold on to your logical self, which can be difficult if the relationship starts causing you to have emotional flashbacks. So when that happens, you lose a lot of logical thinking, and you're working primarily out of your emotional brain. You're experiencing a lot of amygdala hijackings, and what's basically happening is that you are the adult you are, but who is taking over your thought processes, your emotional states, the decisions you make, and your belief system is actually your inner child. The trauma has woken up the unhealed inner child. And if we don't recognize what's happening, you will stay in the relationship trying to heal. It's the same motive, trying to heal. However, you don't have the logical side of your brain online to help you. And what happens in that scenario is you wind up staying a really long time being stuck in a trauma bond. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, you can be healthy with dormant trauma. And that doesn't mean you're not healthy, but it does mean that if your subconscious recognizes something similar, it can wake it up and you can fall for the trauma bond again. The reason I want to stress this is because a lot of people in relationships with malignant narcissists, they leave the relationship, right? They eventually leave the relationship and they think that that's enough. Now they've left that and they're going to now memorize red flags and they're never going to fall for a narcissist again. The truth is, you have to heal the trauma. And most of trauma comes from the past. A lot of people don't want to deal with that. They think the past is in the past, let's leave it there. But the truth is, you really have to work through it, otherwise you will be susceptible again. Okay, so what exactly is the trauma bond? When I ask people this, I get all kinds of different answers. Like some people will say the trauma bond is when you're in a relationship that's abusive and you just can't leave. When you are addicted to a toxic relationship. I've had some people say it's when logically you know you want out, but your body won't let you leave, right? Those are all good answers, but honestly what they are really symptoms of a trauma bond. So what a trauma bond is in just one simple sentence is it's an intermittent relationship that creates an addiction in your body. So the intermittent hot and cold, love and hate, amazing horror. You're basically living life at extremes. That's what creates a trauma bond. If the person loves you one day and hates you the next and there's no in between, like everything is either completely black or completely white, then you are in a relationship that's using intermittent hot and cold. Okay? So what happens to a person when they are in a trauma bond? Now, to explain this, I'm going to talk about mice and rats, okay? Which sounds silly, but this is what scientists understood about the trauma bond, okay? When they had rats or mice in a controlled environment and the mice had a lever that they can pull or push and it released a treat, well, they would use it all the time, right? But they would still go about their life. They still had their mice family. They still did things outside of just hitting that lever. So they decided to experiment, right? So they now took the pellets out. They left the lever in and the mice would hit the lever and nothing would happen. They would try to hit it for a little bit, but once they realized it was consistently never giving them a treat, they went about their life, right? They had their mice families, they did their little maze things, they did whatever mice do, right? So then they decided to experiment again. And they're like, well, what if sometimes they get a treat and sometimes they don't? And that was when things got really interesting. What happened was when the mice would hit the lever and only sometimes get a treat and sometimes they wouldn't, because it was inconsistent and they couldn't really predict or understand when it was going to happen, not only did they stay at the lever, right, hitting it all the time, but they neglected everything else in their life, including social interactions. They also neglected food and water and basic necessities. In other words, it created such damage and control in their mind that they obsessively hit the lever, forgetting everything else in their life. So I want you to think about if you were in a trauma bond in the past, whether it was with a significant other or a narcissistic family member, coworker, whatever the situation. Isn't it true that in that trauma bond, the only thing that was important, the focal point of your life, was trying to get that person to respond to you in the way that was the positive way, where they loved you or treated you well? And your passions that were at one time important to you, you stopped doing those. Your friends, the friendships you had prior to the relationship, fell apart, deteriorated. Your health, in many cases, people that wind up in these kinds of relationships, they exercise, they like to be healthy, but in the relationship, in the trauma bond, it becomes such a focus that their health completely changes. That's what happens in a trauma bond. You stop seeing you stop caring about your life, your wants, your needs without realizing it. Okay, this isn't like on a conscious level where we're saying, I don't love myself, I'm not going to care about myself. No, this happens on a subconscious level. And you are literally revolving around one purpose. And that purpose is trying to somehow figure out how to make this person stay consistent. That's what it's like to be in a trauma bond. And as a result of that, you wind up becoming a stranger to yourself. Okay? So I know that a lot of people say, go no contact. Right? And so there are basically two ways that you can break out of a trauma bond. The same thing with any addiction, really, right? There's cold turkey, and then there's people that start taking steps towards getting rid of the addiction. And everyone's different. Everyone's different. Like when I was a teenager and I was smoking and I tried to cut down so that I could eventually quit, didn't work for me. I had to go cold turkey. And it was horrible in the beginning, but then it was gone. So some people are like that. They go cold turkey, and if that's the case, if you're realizing that this person is really toxic for you and you decide to cut them out of your life, you're going to want to have some things in place because it's going to be horrible before it gets better. Because your body is going to be pushing you to want to contact this person, to want to reestablish the relationship. Okay, your body is going to be going against your logical mind. So you have to be prepared for that. So it's really good to have a support system. And it's also good to kind of prepare. Like, what are you going to do when that craving comes up? In other words, mentally prepare yourself before you amputate, okay? People that do it too fast without mentally, emotionally, psychologically preparing themselves wind up going back several times before they wind up building up the ability to stay away. So that's one way to do it. The other way is to start building up your resistance, okay? So if you're still in the relationship, some of the ways that you can start empowering yourself, which can help you to feel empowered when you eventually do go cold turkey or no contact, is start noticing you. Like, bring your focus back to you, okay? Because the truth is, when you're in that trauma bond, you are way down here on your list. Like, you don't even see yourself. You don't check in with yourself. You're not even aware of what's going on inside. So some things that you want to ask yourself regularly are, what am I feeling? Start noticing your emotions, even if you just notice them objectively, without judgment. Like, oh, wow, I'm feeling really sad. I'm feeling really upset. I'm really hurt right now. Interesting. Just notice your feelings objectively. The next thing you can ask yourself is, what do I need right now to feel good? What does my inner self need? Start bringing your focus back onto you. That's how you start building empowerment in these relationships. The next step towards getting even more empowered would be starting to put down boundaries, not only physical boundaries, but emotional boundaries as well. In other words, when you're in a trauma bond, the person that you're in a trauma bond with normally dictates your moods, right? If you're happy, they're mad. And so suddenly they're angry, so you get down, they get happy. There's all this like emotional regulation going on all the time. Start noticing your emotions and when somebody else is trying to change your emotional state. And again, the first step is about noticing objectively. Like, wow, I'm happy, and I just realized that every time I'm happy, I get this dirty look. Or every time I'm doing something that I enjoy, that it's just for me, the person starts like saying little things as if I'm doing something wrong. Interesting. Just start noticing objectively, and then start allowing yourself to stay you, even if that person is upset. And of course, this advice really is only for people who are not in any physical danger, okay? So let's say while you were still very strongly trauma bonded, whenever you were, let's just use reading a book as a passion. Let's say you're reading a book, the person gets mad, you would stop reading, right? Empowerment is about, you're reading the book, you notice the person's mad, but you realize that they're allowed to be mad. Like, you're not meant to control that person. You're not put on this planet to make sure that everything you do keeps that person happy. We all have to take responsibility for our feelings, and if they choose to be an angry person, that's their choice. You also have a choice. You have a choice to notice their anger and give yourself permission to stay you. That's the emotional boundary. They're angry. They're allowed to be angry. I'm allowed to enjoy reading a book. I'm not doing anything wrong. And allow yourself to stay you. Those are the first steps. Now, you're going to notice that things change in the relationship. Okay? So I want to say this to prepare you. What will change, that will be hard, is the other person will get worse. They will get more mean. They will get more angry. They will get more critical. Because they actually enjoy the way things are in a trauma bond. They enjoy no emotional boundaries. They enjoy controlling you with their anger. Okay? So prepare yourself. They will change, but so will you. Because the second you begin putting focus on you, what will change is you will suddenly feel like you. Now that may sound silly, but from experience, when I first started putting this stuff into practice, that was my first thought was, wow, I suddenly feel like me. Like I feel grounded in myself. And it's because you are listening to your inner self. You are connected to yourself again instead of disconnecting from yourself and focusing only on the other person. Okay? So it's not easy. It's not fun to work through a trauma bond, but you can do it. And I hope this information helped. And if you struggle, if you're feeling like you don't have support and you need some support, make sure you check out the Thriver School of Transformation, because we meet live every week and we work through this together so that you don't have to feel like you're doing it all alone.